just started recording. Yeah, we're on. Fantastic. Good morning, everybody. This is obviously the first time we are meeting. You're already more than halfway through the course, I understand. We have got quite a lot to go through today. But at the same time, I would like to say that I don't want to rush through all the slides because there's a lot to cover. But ideally, I would like to tailor the content to your needs and sort of the background where you're coming from. So my name is Dr. Rick Boydurjo. I'm a social scientist and a business consultant. I started my career at the University of Oxford as a researcher, followed by my time at Cambridge and University of Sussex for at least 10 years. My research expertise largely falls in the areas of innovation and entrepreneurship, development and environmental economics, gig economy, and also the future of work. More recently, in the past few years, I've lived and worked in China and Central Asia, where besides my teaching and research, I've also advised businesses, especially family-owned and SMEs, in addition to large companies such as Disney and Alibaba. During my PhD, I had started my enterprise that provided solar energy technology solutions to both households and industrial purposes, with operations in Singapore, Indonesia, and India. So that's a super brief bio of myself. As we progress through the slides in the next 2 years, hours that we have in a collaborative manner, I'll also take an opportunity to know more about your background and motivation. So that's pretty much me. Okay, so I think I've got quite a few more participants joining in. Fantastic. Just in time. So I've just started. I've just given you my brief bio, so I don't think anybody missed anything so far. So one of the things that I was mentioning earlier is try to tailor the content to your needs, specific needs, because we've got certain predetermined learning outcomes, and of course, some of the learning goals that has been set. You've got access to these resources already. But I would like to add a few more resources that I have selected just to add to the content so that we simply don't sort of go through the selected content only. Let me just change the slide here quickly because I don't think it's the right one. Won't be a minute. Technology, all right. Okay, sorry, just a second. I don't think something's working here. No, for some reason, we're looking at a different slide. Let me just quickly change to screen share. In that way, we can look at PowerPoint instead. Yeah, okay. Got it. All right. Okay, can everybody see my PowerPoint here? If we could just quickly get some thumbs up, that'll be great. Just to get started with. Can you see this slide, please?
Yeah, we can.
Fantastic, thank you. So I can't see you right now. So, but obviously, if you are adding some notes to the chat, I can pick up on those as we progress along. So these are the learning outcomes that we have. So the first one would be to identify what's your stage of growth at the moment for your business, and also how it will be necessary to evolve the shape of the organization to implement growth. Now, I'm vaguely aware that you've got very different backgrounds, which would actually add to the diversity of the discussion. So we can obviously look at some of the theoretical models we have, but also see how some practical aspects could be added. The second learning goal is really look at the different structures, that organizational structure that SMEs have and the way they work, and some of the implications that it carries. The third learning outcome is looking at different business backgrounds that you have, the roles and training programs that is required in the context of dynamic capabilities. Now, this is a concept that you may not be familiar with just yet, but I'll introduce you. And then finally, in the context of Industry 4.0, because we are living in the fourth industrial revolution era, how to facilitate agile working, not in the context of pandemic and hashtag work from home, but generally speaking, how agile working has been a standard practice. So these are the four sections that we have got today. But as I said in the beginning, I would not rush through all the sections just to cover the materials, but go through certain sections with detail. You can also add some of your own experiences and resources to make it more fruitful. So to start with, obviously you're more than halfway through the course. The first module was mainly looking at strategy and innovation. And really the question was, how does innovation affect organizational design? I think we've got quite a few people waiting in the lobby. All right, I think there's quite a lot to do here. Yeah, I think it's been added. Thanks, Sue. So the first module was really, feels like ages ago, but the question was how does innovation affect the organizational design? We also talked about vision, mission, and values in the fourth module. I hope that you remember some of the mission statement and vision that you shared together, because you can always get back to them. The second module was looking at digital adoption. So that will help this session to identify factors. How does automation and digital adoption impact the organizational design for your businesses? The internationalization and winning new markets, I'm not sure if it applies to all the businesses that we have today in our room, but what does it mean for our design that we have? And obviously, this is the stage where you start developing a sustainable business model. So this is the first module that kickstarts that section. So that's where we have. Now, I would like to start by looking at this particular STAR model, which was developed by Jay Galbraith, and I thought it's quite relevant in our context today. This model has also evolved over the years. There's been quite a few publications on this in Harvard Business Review from time to time as new markets emerged, ongoing changes in the existing markets, the power dynamics, how open innovation has taken place between large corporations and SMEs, how startups are supported, using accelerator, incubation hubs, and startup studios that we have today. So I think this is quite pertinent in this context, just to understand how the organizational design can be better crafted. So it all starts with the strategy. So what is the goal? And as Aristotle once said, when the goal becomes difficult to reach, don't adjust the goal, but adjust the steps. So what is the goal? Where you are at the moment? Where do you want to get to? And what are the tools at your disposal or resources that you have, tangible, intangible, and others, to get you there? It could be via using strategic partnerships or in-house resources that you have not really identified to its true potential just yet. So that's the overarching strategy, which we don't really change that very often. Obviously, we have to adjust the planning mechanisms from time to time. So it does start with identifying the capabilities that we have in-house so far. Now, if you've not come across this particular concept over the past few weeks, one of the concepts that we need in the context of today's discussion is dynamic capabilities. So in simple terms, what resources you have, what resources you need. So for example, you are acquiring talent. So how often do you have to train and develop them to make sure that they're up to date with everything that's been happening around us, given changes in our environment, internal and external? And also, what are the resources that you do not have, but would like to have? So for example, it could be, I don't know, not just in-house resources, but one of your competitive advantage could be your location. So that's something that you need to improve, or it's good, but you've got other new competitors in town in the same business. So how do you improve your current locational advantage? The second part is it's a bit more tricky, sort of a hard S, as we call it, structure. How is the organization organized at this moment? What are the key roles? Are the deliverables clear? Uh, do you have multiple line managers for a few staff members? Are the sort of colliding? Are the roles clear? Do you have job rotation at place? Is it good? Is it simply meant for empowerment purposes, or does it dilute the role of individuals? So importantly, really, this is also the section when you look at structure, how the monitoring and evaluation takes place. So how is the work managed, and also who has power and authority. That also brings us to the context of organizational chart and organizational structure. The other one is the processes and the, as you can see, the lateral capability. What is the decision? I mean, especially if your organization is quite innovative and you encourage creativity and innovation as a part of your operations, how do you capture new ideas? How do you manage risk? That's something to consider also. But also, how are decisions made? How easy it is to sort of uphold decisions or sort of creative ideas, and how do you commercialize it? So it's important to have that system in place. Do you have a realist? Do you have a dreamer? Do you have a critic in your team? And how do you make it all work? So processes and also lateral capability. The other one is the setting the right metrics, rewards, KPI. But also when you discuss this, organizational design or culture or motivation, the role of leadership is paramount in this context. So what is the reward structure in place at the moment? Could it be improved over time? What is the staff attrition rate? Because that also says a lot. But also, what is the standard behavior sort of shaped by the goals? So you've got this values, mission statement, and vision that you have set for your organization, but how do they inform the culture of your organization? Generally, the one of the most popular definition of culture is the way we do things around here. So it's really sort of its experience rather than defined in a couple of sentences. So that's the thing. So reward structure is something that sort of is important. The final one is the people and the practices. So what sort of talent is required? What do you have at the moment? How can they be developed? And also, if you are going for talent acquisition as a part of your strategy. But also, again, I mean, this tendency to believe that the grass is green, but sometimes we tend to overlook or sort of undermine the talent that we may already have in-house. So these are some of the components that sort of interconnected, so they're not really sort of working independently, but they all help us to sort of set up or reach or support the strategy in place. Now you will see there's another diagram, which is slightly less uneasy than the one in the middle. It's similar, but it's just another version of the STAR model. As I was saying before, this model has evolved over time as different markets have emerged, different forms of organizations have come up, and how we approach the strategic goals. So quick reference to some data here, how the implications of the pandemic on SMEs. This is an article that I published last year, and it's quite interesting because there's quite a lot of data here. For example, in China, the venture capital investment in new companies declined by 60% in the first quarter of 2020. That's significant, that's colossal, compared to the first quarter of 2019. Again, in Canada, a survey suggested that 59% of Canadians are considerably less likely to start a business after the pandemic than before. And these are worrying. These stats indicate the market risks and so on. But the reason why I'm pointing to this particular article, if you get a chance, you can read this. There's a link here, is because I do identify the factors that caused some of this to happen. And some problems are a lot more sort of systemic. So, it's sort of easy to point out that due to the pandemic, but in some cases, the problems that SMEs faced were systemic. So this article investigates some of those factors and see how the problems could be, some of the problems could be addressed. The other one, as I was mentioning initially, the concept of Industry 4.0, and I think as a reference point, we call this Industry 4.0 because you've got 4 components in the 4th industrial revolution era. Systems are agile. Number 1, we rely on intelligent systems. Number 2, we depend on the cloud-based system. Number 3, and smart. So basically, these are the 4 components we understand: intelligent system, cloud-based system, and also agile, which we tend to use as a reference to Industry 4.0. So this is a tricky concept, business growth. Lots of research articles are there. Lots of businesses have defined how they, what are the indicators of business growth. Then comes the question, how do you measure your business growth? So it's quite different, because if you take example of how, for example, Sir Richard Branson defined growth for Virgin compared to a family-owned business or a micro-enterprise, identifying factors that defines growth for their businesses. So this is really a question for you, because I think I've spoken for about 10 minutes. How do you measure your business growth? Obviously, you're going to have more than one or a combination of a few, but which ones can you identify as sort of indicators for your business growth? Shall we just take a quick poll and then we can continue from there? Anybody would like to share?
Well, I'm afraid we're really boring. We just deal with profitability and turnover.
Okay. Profitability and turnover. Okay, all right. Anyone else?
Rick, you've got Meg has added in sales and employees.
That's the same for me as well.
Okay. I think we've got a response in the chat. Meg, hi. Sales and employees. Yeah, correct. Guy, turnover, profitability, number of employees. Okay. The employees, I think it was mentioned 3 times already. Could you share a bit more about what you mean when you said you measure growth by employees? Is it simply looking at the productivity or addressing the productivity gap, which is sometimes a problem for SMEs?
So for me, it's because I started out as a one-man band and then developed into a business as a whole. So the idea that I have employees and the way that the growth of those employees enables me to deliver a service to a greater number of people. That's how I can kind of see that we're growing. So we're giving, not only are we giving employment to more people, which is a positive thing, I suppose that dabbles a little bit with social impact, because it's important to me to create sustainable jobs in this industry because we have a really high turnover. But also, yeah, the idea that I started out was just me and now I'm more.
It's fantastic. I'm just curious. So how did you sort of have to change the structure as the organization grow, or do you still sort of function as a startup? Because even if when some businesses grow, they don't necessarily change the structure.
I think for us, because of the style of our business, so we're a personal training company, and we're quite focused on having a small, close-knit feel and a community feel. So for us, we're probably more likely to be like a pod system. So when we've maximized on our current situation, then we'll replicate it. So I think it's probably similar roles, but like a duplicate, like a twin business somewhere else. So I guess you'd add an element of probably an overseeing management of the 2 places, but they'd be quite mirrored within each other.
Fantastic. That actually adds to the discussion. Thank you, Meg.
Right.
Anyone else? James, hi. Sales profitability and company value. Okay. I would like to pick up on the third one, company value. How do you measure it? Not just obviously, because we capture value in different forms.
Yep, so there's several measures. One is number of customers that we have ongoing renewal contracts with, but the ideal is to have, there's another one beginning with our going to come to me. So basically, we're looking at renewable and repeat business as to how we actually identify the company value.
Okay, yeah, it's good. Anyone else? It's interesting. I mean, if you look at the, sort of the way we understand growth, very often it's sort of very much process based. So, so one of the indicators, one of the common growth indicators that we have, they're all outcome based indicators, except when you mention employees, there was a new scope that we added to the discussion. But could process development be also considered as an improvement, for example, improvement in quality? I don't know if you have experienced or sort of have to do this at some point. Process development, improvement in quality. How do we go about this? We looked at sales and turnover, which is clearly an increase in amount, looking at growth. But also when you look at employee size as the organization grows, that also defines growth. But in terms of process development, what sort of strategies can we have in place, or you already may have done it?
I guess the more systemization that you put in place, the more efficient that you can be in developing and delivering your product to potentially then more people for less cost. So that then links in with your profit margins and your consistency of delivery as well. If there's more processes, then hopefully there's less human error, less variability, so it's easier to scale up.
I think it takes us back to the previous slide, because I've got a question now. Is there something that you would like to add to this list? Because these are standard indicators. I don't think it always captures some of the new forms of businesses we have today, especially if you're running an online business or e-tail, electronic retail or e-commerce sector. Any ideas? Visits to the page. Yeah, okay. That's definitely something. So it does also require, it could be a budget issue, because obviously you have to keep refining your landing page and how you manage your omni channels. I don't know if any of you manage omni channels. Omni channels referring to you've got in-store and also online business platforms. Anything else? Any other measures? Visits to the page is absolutely, that's number one. It also makes it difficult to decide which platforms are you going to advertise on. That's one of the hardest bits. Not only on social media, but also there are various other forms of online adverts. But I just want you to think a bit more about, if you're running an omni-channel, that you've got, how many of you have omni-channels, just to make sure that it applies to you. You've got online and also in-store operations. Okay, because it does have other implications, because you then have to train the employees and also inform the customers from time to time how they can approach you and what sort of portfolios that you have to offer. Okay, Craig, thanks. We have online. Craig, I don't think your microphone is working, so that will be a bit tricky. But yeah, okay. Let's just wait for you to type a few more lines.
I think in the past we found the people that have accessed by the browser rather than the app, we can't ever hear them.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I'm just waiting for Craig to share more. But also it depends on what sort of markets you are in. The definition of growth of the indicators might have to be revised, because these are the standard ones that we have so far. But also, if, as if you're running an omni-channel or a very sort of you're in the knowledge economy, offering consulting services, so dealing with knowledge workers. So looking at the number of employees sometimes don't really capture the story. So in terms of talent acquisition, what are the strategies in place would be something to identify, because talent acquisition versus conventional HR hiring is a bit different. So this is something to think about going forward the next 5 years. I'm not going to use the word, so the term new normal, but as the market stands today, how do you capture growth and how do you define growth going forward? Using the same indicators as in the past or something new that you could introduce? This is the typical sort of, as we understand the business growth model, or the different stages that you have got in the business, any business that you have at the moment. So they typically have got 4 stages. You've got the startup stage. There's a fissure in between startup and growth. And between growth and maturity is where you actually recalibrate, or you can afford to recalibrate, come up with new strategies before you hit the final stage, which is the exit or decline stage. Typically, we have used the word decline, where you can either have a rebirth, I don't know, you could have an internationalization strategy, expanding or extending your diversification, or you go for integration, or if timely decisions are not made, then obviously decline or death is one of the outcomes. Very quickly, again, I'm just to make it a bit more collaborative, where would you identify your business at the moment as it stands? Which stage are you in, and what is your core strategy in place? Of the 4 that you have here, where are you now? Growth, okay. And it's an interesting question that you often don't always reflect or discuss is, when did you realize that you have actually entered the growth stage? So this fissure between startup and growth, what were the indicators that you have entered growth, and what changed then, except obviously the market size and responses that you received from employees and so on? Okay, maybe you can start with Meg, because you mentioned growth is where you are.
Yeah, I'd say I put us in growth. We're somewhere sort of probably just moving from startup to growth, because we've existed for quite a long time, but I, as the business owner, have been a bit patchy around having children. So for me, we have all of the basis and all the structure there ready. So the startup element is done. We're just now ready to take to that and run with it. So we're on the up. So we're moving, like I said, we're probably done with startup and we're going into growth.
Fantastic. It makes, it's a bit difficult when you investigate a bit more in detail where on the growth curve you are at the moment. So is it hitting sort of close towards maturity or halfway through? Is it sort of, do you define it by the targets or set by yourself, or targets set by the industry or competitors? That also defines where you are on the growth part of the curve. That's something to explore. James, Rebecca, you've mentioned maturity for both of you, and also, yeah, sales plateau and consistency. Again, what are the indicators that you've reached maturity in terms of your resource capability, or your target market size? Anybody could chip in. James, Rebecca.
From our point of view, it's been the time we've been in the market compared to others. So very mature as far as the positioning in the market is concerned. As I put maturity, I'm actually quite tempted to put us more to rebirth because of change in the management, where the founding directors have moved on to other things, and so that's what's made the management structure change. So yeah, it could actually be rebirth that we're in, and it's probably more just the situation that indicates it rather than any other indicators from the previous page.
When do you think the intervention was made in particular? So you mentioned you were in the rebirth stage, which is fantastic, but the decisions to go in that direction was taken exactly when? During maturity or fairly recently?
Yeah, probably during maturity. So the previous MD and one of the founding directors, his personal circumstances changed, which meant his focus drifted away from the business itself to other things which were necessary. And he had a recognition that he needed to put somebody else in place of himself. And in doing so, that sparked the change in the management structure. So yeah, it could be maturity still that sparked the change, but I think it was actually more personal circumstances of and maybe age come into it a little bit as well of the owners.
At this stage, again, thank you very much. This is very quite detailed and specific. At this stage, when you are at the rebirth phase, what sort of new risks have you identified? Did you change the business model at all?
It applied more focus to the business model, actually. So as part of it, in fact, we split the company into two to actually allow more focus for the different divisions that were involved, so that there wasn't a conflict of target markets.
Okay, it's conflict target markets. Yeah, that's something you can also pick up on further. Rebecca, would you like to add something to the discussion? You're also at the same stage as you mentioned.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, yeah. Can you?
So my business grew through an acquisition. So we started off as a one-site hairdressing business and bought another about 7 years ago. So the first one had kind of hit a maturity level, and we saw that as an opportunity to grow. So that kind of became a bit of a rebirth by going from 1 to 2. And that was 7 years ago. So that's all well established now, and we're quite mature as one organisation, although that took quite a while. And yeah, I would say possibly a rebirth as a bit of a post-pandemic scenario at the moment. And
what sort of new risks have you identified in terms of managing, obviously, the two businesses as one? It's been 7 years that I'm assuming it's one business now.
Yeah, one business. Do you mean a risk at the time?
Yeah.
It was quite a big risk in terms of merging two business cultures and trying to establish one team and one kind of coherent strategy and get everyone to be part of the same work culture. And so if we were going to expand again in the same way, which is kind of what I'm contemplating, I would see as the biggest risk again is the people side of it rather than the operational or financial side.
So I'm assuming the leadership change also affected the way the
yes. So the previous owners of the salon that I bought left. They retired, and they had quite different leadership style to me.
Yeah. Okay. That's great. Okay. Anyone else like to share your stage?
It's Simon.
Hi.
Probably at the maturity stage, but having been through rebirth multiple times. So what we tend to find is we have a particular product market, and that reaches maturity and starts going down, and then we need to find an adjacent market as part of the rebirth to then grow into different areas. So yeah, we can't stay in the same market for too long, otherwise it starts to deteriorate. So we're currently in I would say the maturity phase, and then another rebirth be required for growth.
Okay. And along the way, I mean, did you find sort of strategic alliances useful, or was it managed by the same team as the phase changed?
There has been changes through the process, and probably significant changes, yes. I think where we've had to do this so many times, I think there's a change culture built into this. So it's accepted that you can't stand still. Our market's very, very custom, very innovative. So it's short contracts, and then once they're done, they're done. They don't keep going ad infinitum. So you have to go and find new ones.
Yeah, it's interesting because when they say innovation is a business, then risk is your business. Maintaining the change culture, I think, have its own risk, but also that's your competitive advantage. Obviously, I don't know the details of the enterprise just yet, but okay. But the fact that you said you have already been through this maturity and rebirth many times over, definitely. Now, obviously, you mentioned you're also at the maturity of the previous rebirth that has taken place. Okay. Any other responses? Anybody in the startup stage, perhaps, just to add to that component? No? Okay. One of the things I mentioned was having the strategic alliances. What sort of strategic partnerships that you are signing up for? That's something we could also look at, because the role of partners is, you mentioned you're in the innovation business. Simon, one of the things that is quite common is how do you embrace open innovation, which does mean sort of working with other firms who have got something to offer to you. So opening up doors for open innovation helps you to add to those competencies. So yeah, I think sometimes the role of partners, depending, of course, what sort of business and industry you're in, that's something to look for. The importance of open innovation, especially the maturity stage, because you really can't afford that until you reach that peak. It's just high risk. There's just another sort of an article I just wanted to point out. Leading SMEs by cultivating a reward culture, especially in the context of innovation or innovative businesses, because okay. So we've got a workshop activity that we'll be doing shortly, but before that, let's look at the different types of organizational structures that we have at the moment. So, and really sort of which one to choose given the nature of your business, the scale, and also the stage of your business in particular. Sometimes it changes, which is not hugely uncommon, especially if you're between growth and maturity. This is a given reality. So looking at the work specialization, if you've got a diversified portfolio, or even if you've got a limited set of specialization that you offer, it's sort of important to identify whether they're narrow or broad. Also looking at the hierarchy, is it sort of the power structure also is defined in certain ways, tall or flat. How many people do you directly manage? We've got a small span of control and big span of control. What are the rules and regulations, how it is formalized, and finally, the organizational structure, whether it's centralized or decentralized. So here, when you look at work specialization, how much work we divide into separate jobs. One of the findings recently, I think it was from Forbes, they said, especially after the pandemic, people are focusing more on generalists rather than specialists. And they interviewed like 1,200 firms in the US to come up with that conclusion. Would you disagree? If you are recruiting now, are you looking more for generalists or specialists?
Personally, for me, when I'm recruiting now, the more that I'm learning is the personality and whether they reflect our ethos is the most important thing over what their qualifications and experience are, because we can teach that a lot easier. So I guess we would go more generalist with regards to qualifications in an effort to get someone whose ethos better aligns with ours.
Okay. Thanks, Meg. It's really interesting. Any other responses?
Yeah, I would say not necessarily on the recruitment side, but certainly in the workforce, we are actively retraining staff in other areas of the business. So the fact that they become more mobile and we can move staff from one area to another. So the fact that it becomes a more flexible workforce. That's something that's we're having to do. really.
Yeah. So consequently, you're also encouraging job rotation, job enlargement, and job revolvement, which does also empower them in the process. It's also difficult at times, isn't it? Because obviously sometimes they're trying out new roles, which may or may not suit them eventually. But then it's also an opportunity to recognize which talent is missing or what sort of talent we require going forward. Yeah. Okay. Anyone else? Generalist or specialist if you're hiring today?
Actually, we're exclusively looking at specialists for new areas of technology, just to be contrary, whilst everybody else is talking about generalists. But with particularly, you mentioned cloud platforms, things like that, that's skills that we just didn't have, and we're having to bring those skills in. And that's not something that you can train in a short period of time. So you have to bring in senior technical people.
For the training in particular, because it's quite a big thing today, do you normally sort of outsource those training, or you've got in-house capabilities built in so that you've got new members joining you, or new staff joining you, and you don't really have to send them to a training program, but you already have something in-house?
Yeah, we have mentorship, so everybody that joins has a mentor.
That's a huge plus, actually. That's your inbuilt capability in-house. Anyone else?
Yeah, much the same. We are now doing far more training in-house than we did previously.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's again, that's if you're at the maturity stage, that's a huge plus, because it has affected a number of businesses in the past 2 years, in particular, adapting to this cloud platforms and how agile systems can function in a different way. I mean, agile systems are not anything new. It's been there for at least a decade in different forms, but the way it's managed, using the Industry 4.0 tools, have shifted, so to speak. So that's really important, sort of how you extend and expand your specialization. But one of the things that Simon said was quite interesting. You were encouraging a job rotation, enlargement, and job revolvement, which going forward empowers the current staff members. So this is an example of a typical tall hierarchy where you've got somebody at the top, and then sort of, I'll just give you a minute just to look at this particular tall hierarchy model. And I'm just wondering how many of you have a tall hierarchy in your organization? Or is it more horizontal? And we also call this as a vertical hierarchy.
No, ours is a lot flatter than that.
It could be because you are in the innovative sector, innovation business. So typically they tend to be a lot horizontal, sharing. Anyone else? Anyone else have this? James, you're sharing something? I'll just wait for a second. It's interesting. Most of the time we talk about vertical and horizontal structure. We end up discussing which one's better, which one's not ideal, but it's really sort of very much business specific. It has got its own pros. So, okay, can I assume that we don't have a organization that have got a tall structure, tall hierarchy?
No, okay, so ours is getting taller as you grow.
Craig, right? Okay, so the other one is obviously more flatter. This video, I'm not sure it's gonna. Let me know if you can hear. I've just embedded this YouTube video. It's quite interesting. I mean, you might wonder why am I looking at Steve Jobs, because that's not a SME, but he basically said that they function as a startup. So they don't have teams and departments or divisional structure. They tend to allocate one person for the entire sort of work, whether it's about iPhones or any product line. I'm just going to try playing it. Let's see if you can hear. Can you hear it? Okay, fantastic. It's interesting. I mean, one of the things I would like to explore at this stage is what are the risks if you have such a structure? I mean, it sounded all good, you know, how perfectly it functions, and obviously looking at Apple, yeah, sure. But if you had to try this, what are the sort of some practical risks that we have to manage?
Someone not meeting expectations?
Yeah, or difficulty in managing such structure, the lack of a defined structure.
Almost sort of one of the roles that came to mind, like an additional role that came to mind, is you almost need like an HR person overlooking the well-being of all of those independent individuals to make sure that although they've all got individual jobs, some of them are going to have a greater load than others. And so just making sure that no one falls behind and are therefore able to quite happily deliver on their metrics and things.
Excellent. Yeah, it's very true. Very, very true. Any other risks?
I think you'd need a really strong ethos as well to make sure that everyone, even though they have independent roles, gets an idea of the overall ethos of the company so that they're carrying out those roles within that remit. Otherwise it might feel too segmented.
Absolutely, I totally agree. I mean, again, it comes down to how effective communication is managed and maintained in organization. Aligning individual goals with organizational goals, sharing the vision, and making sure everybody actually gets the vision more than the strategy or the planning mechanism in place. It's actually quite hard sometimes because it's easy to share the plans, layout of the plans, but to align everyone else with the vision, that can get tricky. But as you said, I fully agree. This ethos is supreme. I mean, you know, everything is informed by that from the top. Everything that we do, everything that we choose not to do. The other thing is the span of control, and it's quite a lot of work has been done in different parts of the world, looking at different types of businesses. So generally, you've got a narrow span of control and a wide span of control. So there was a study that was, again, I think conducted back in the US, that says if your span of control is less than 6, the people that you're directly managing, that's a narrow span of control. With 6 and more, that's wide span of control. Based on your experiences, sort of what is the ideal span of control for a particular line manager? Who you directly mentor, supervise, or develop or manage simply. Is 10 too much, you think, or?
I think it depends on the abilities of the person involved. My span of control is 8, which is okay. So it's sort of halfway between there. But and I'm okay with that. But I can imagine for some of my managers that level of span could be too much. Depends on the roles and the activities involved.
This 8 is an interesting number. I mean, yeah, thanks for sharing that. Are they all in the same department, the same sort of specialization, or it's across teams and divisions?
Yeah, no, those are all the department heads that report to me.
Yeah, okay. Anyone else?
I think it depends as a manager as well, how much of your total workload is managing those people and how much is doing other duties as well. So if your entire job was just to manage people, and it's all about just delegating tasks to those people and allocating tasks sort of thing, then you could probably manage more people. But if you are having to do your own tasks as well, and maybe only half of your time was spent managing people, then you wouldn't be able to manage as many.
Especially if you're doing it in a systematic way, if you're helping them develop personal development plans and making sure that you can appraise them from time to time, that becomes tricky as the numbers grow. But yeah, anyone else, just to make sure that?
Yeah, I think Meg raises a good point there. you can't, certainly if you've got more than 2 or 3 people, you can't do and direct or manage. Certainly with 8, you certainly can't do anything. You are down to purely directing and making sure the fact that everyone knows exactly what's required, and you're just going through and making sure things are okay. If you're actually doing a day job, then you certainly can't do that level of span. No, I totally agree.
The degree of engagement also matters, isn't it? Especially because, I mean, if you've got a strategic role, you know, your role says that you've got strategic decision making to do, but most of the time, if we look at the nature of our workload, we're simply problem solving all the time. So to reasonably engage with a number of people consistently in a systematic way becomes harder, because problem solving becomes the priority all the time, rather than sitting and doing some strategic thinking in a systematic way. So yeah, so some really strong points. I mean, it depends on obviously stage and nature of the industry, but I quite found the number 8 to be interesting. Obviously, they're divisional heads, as you said, Simon. But then again, we have to look at how many people or how many followers do they have, individual. So you've got 8 people who are reporting to you, but each one.
Yeah, no, they're not. They don't each have 8 below them. But it is a fairly flat structure, like you're showing. I think there's only 4 levels to the whole organisation, so it's pretty flat.
How many are there in your organisation, Simon?
85, Meg. So yeah, it's a very flat structure with only 4 levels. So yeah, there's quite a high degree of control.
Right. Thanks. That's I'm getting to know a bit more about your businesses. I think the conversation will a bit more engaging as we progress. This is an example of a typical team-based structure. In other words, we also call this a holacracy. So you've got tall structure, flat structure, and it's a holacracy. So it's sort of very much focusing not on necessarily in the roles and the responsibilities, but sort of what sort of projects and goals they have. So you form the teams as per the projects and the goals instead. So yeah, this is just a sample. Some of you may be able to refer to this a lot more than this one here, given the flatness of the structure. So that's a team-based structure. You've got president on the top, and then you've got managers managing quite a few in their specialization area. This is the popular matrix structure, and it works great, mostly for innovative organizations, or also organizations that have got a diversified portfolio. So in terms of the scope and scale of the businesses, they can afford to have such a structure. But one of the problems, because you've got cross functionalities and teams working with one another, or the departments working with one another, is having multiple bosses, which could lead to competing goals and accountabilities. So who do I go to and talk to if I'm stuck or I need help? First, you have to have the structure to make sure that actually they are okay to go and sort of come up and ask questions. But then the challenge becomes, who do I talk to if I have this sort of structure? So you've got 2 variables here. So along x-axis, you've got the product, and then along y-axis, you've got the process. So this is a typical example of a garden ornament manufacturer. So that's something, it sort of becomes difficult to manage from time to time if you've got multiple bosses. And I think that's hard. If you're dividing the teams as per their specialization and expertise, then that's clear. But if you are, I don't know, do you have anybody who have tried this structure ever? Probably could elucidate on the risk and challenges of matrix structure.
We're converting to this. And the key problems, you're right about having 2 bosses. The key and the need for this was to improve communication and break down barriers in between in between departments. The key issue that you tend to face with this, though, is people still maintain too vertical a reporting line, and you really have to get them to turn round and focus across rather than upwards. And provided that one of the things that we're finding with this, as long as we get everyone facing sideways and communicating sideways rather than vertically, that it becomes far more successful from the communication point of view, and breaking down the barriers and the walls in between departments. But the challenge is stopping people getting too vertically aligned. They need to use them for support rather than for direction.
Yeah, it's more about the support than direction. You're absolutely right. And some of the recent studies have also shown that sometimes you've got the senior leaders and you've got the innovation managers. It might be useful to have a project manager between them, but it does also, it matters whether they have got the specialization for that particular project. I'm not saying adding one more layer in the process, but in terms of support, just to have that one clearly defined role of a project manager can help at times, especially if in innovation business.
Yeah, sorry, and that's exactly what we've done. We've added a program management department to basically assist in this horizontal comms and control. So yeah, that's exactly what we did.
Yeah, that's great. That's it would be interesting to see if you could draw such a structure for your organization, just to see what changes or what improvements could be made. We sort of these models and charts, I think they're all, we can follow Kaizen approach, where we sort of continually develop them as the times and the structure changes, because they could all could use a facelift. The fourth, it's the concept of centralization and decentralization. Who is making all the decision, especially if you're, because you mentioned, some of you mentioned they've got a flat structure, horizontal organizational structure. So would it be right to assume that you've got a decentralized structure, or the core decisions still come from one or two people only?
We push decision making down to the lowest possible level. Otherwise, it becomes a bottleneck. If it keeps coming up on a flat structure, then it becomes a bottleneck. So yeah, decision making gets pushed down to the lowest possible level.
Mainly the operational decision making. Obviously, the strategic decision making is.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, but in terms of consulting the other layers, when you're making or sort of thinking of taking a strategy, sort of making a strategic move, is it always the senior executives, or somebody from other layers also can get involved?
They can get involved. Generally, it's the whole senior management team that will decide on the strategic management direction.
Okay, yeah. Anyone else would like to share your approach?
For me, it's something I'm going to have to learn to be able to accept other people making decisions, because I've come from that one-man band background. I'm used to controlling everything. So I need to learn how to create a structure where people can make decisions themselves without having to report back to me, and that then potentially slowing things down.
Okay. Anyone else? Again, I mean, it's really just a matter of seeing which one works better for your business. I mean, this whole idea of participatory decision making or having a collaborative approach, it's not necessarily the best way to go forward, depending on your stage of operations and also who you're working with, your partners, the level of employees, and so on. But yeah, at the operational level, it sort of pays to, for example, the third point here. Decisions should be made in the most sensible place. So, for example, discounts to apologize for an error could be decided by the staff serving the customer, because they know exactly what's happening at the ground level. So, yeah, that's something to be aware of. The other thing is the diversity and decision making. So when you recruit people who are the same as you will only ever get your own personality coming back to you. One of the things that I've seen that Disney does, and obviously Disney got multiple diversified portfolio, Disneyland and merchandise and so on. They've got this department of imagineering, where you've got teams of 3 with 1 extra facilitator. So you've got the dreamer, the realist, and the critic. So they work on the same ideas as the dreamer, as the realist, and as the critic. So the dreamer works first, shares the ideas with the critic. The realist also looks at the ideas that dreamer has come up with, and then shares it with the critic. And that way they have got a system to capture, what are the, sort of ideas that we can capture today, and perhaps an idea that seems too overambitious or impossible to achieve today, but it could work tomorrow. So rather than entirely discarding it, we could sort of archive it and work on it tomorrow. And that is something that, again, what they do it also after they do the first round of activity, the dreamer, the realist, and the critic, they leave the room, they go and get a coffee, and they come back to the room and they swap the roles. So the dreamer starts acting like a critic, or the realist starts acting as the dreamer, and then try to see each other's perspective, which is something that, it's quite interesting to see that they've started it way back in the 60s and 70s. Similarly, in this particular lens of diversity and decision making, just to have that space to allow arguments, and again, as I was saying, if innovation is a business, then risk is a business. To use brainstorming and mind mapping, and have people coming from different backgrounds and expertise can actually add to those factors. But also, when it comes to culture, it does. I mean, we can have a discussion on this if we got time. Is the cultural considerations also quite important? So, for example, to have a centralized structure, if you're running a business in East Asia or Central Asia, is actually rather common. But because some societies are more individualistic than collectivist. Some markets, if you would like to enter, for example, if you want to enter the Chinese market, the role of social capital and interpersonal networks plays a significant role. So to have your operations running there, you might have to consider some of these aspects, even though the general approach that you take to run your organization is centralized. In some markets, that might have to be considered differently. So that's one of the considerations, especially if you are expanding your market in other places, in other markets. There's a short clip here where this lady shared some of her experiences. So basically, this lady took over the job of sort of day-to-day running of a garden, a family-run garden ornament manufacturer. She had to contend with a founder and management team who wanted to retain some degree of control as owners of the business. So what she says is quite interesting. Let me see if it works, the audio. Yeah.
I can't hear anything. Is something meant to be?
Oh, is it just you, Guy? How about others?
I couldn't hear anything either, but I thought it was just taking time to load.
If you press the start button, it'll play for you locally.
Oh, right, okay.
Oh.
Just gonna continue.
I took over Garden Perspectives 18 months ago now. It wasn't without its challenges. I think that the traditional management team, who are all still within the company, I should add, my role really has been to take over as the assistant manager and run the company, but we do still have all of the founder members still as part of the team and certainly still on the board. Now, when I first took over, I brought a quite different point of view, quite a different way of working. So I think because I came from a marketing perspective, whereas they are very much more from a traditional manufacturing background, I was much more interested in what do customers think of our products. I also have that approach that says, what about our internal customers? And by that, I actually mean the people who work for us. So what do they
Fantastic. Did you experience something similar? If you have, what sort of friction did you have to overcome? I mean, she was extremely positive about the old and new going hand in hand. It's all positive. Some of the cases that I've seen, that's not been the case. So I'm just curious if you, anybody here know? Okay, well, I guess it's good to be aware of a possibility where this might be a case to consider. So, okay. But I think this is an ongoing discussion around diversity as the organization grows, how we consider some of those practicalities. One of the discussions that we don't often get a chance to discuss with employees and also our other stakeholders is how do you ensure that the culture is well defined and understood? So how do you make sure that the culture, the core beliefs, assumptions, and the values inform everything that we do in the organization? Is there something is there measure? Is there a measure in place that you proactively ensure that reinforces that? How do you ensure the culture is intact and everybody understands it? Do you have rituals at workplace that people can do collectively in a common shared space? It could be anything really, because that's something we can't really define on our website. When you go to the About Us section on our website, it's hard to define that, isn't it? In a couple of sentences, what our culture is. So, in other words, if potential recruit is asking, could you tell me a bit more about your culture? What lens do you use to respond to that sort of question?
I'd say sort of, well, we lack a lot of anything formal. We need to put that in place because we're quite small. But I would say if someone was asking me that in an interview, then it would be I'd return back to sort of the ethos of the company and how we feel about how we approach our clients and the work that we do. So the culture for us is quite a family feel. So that's probably how I'd describe it to them. But like I say, I'm completely lacking in the formal structure of it and having things written down, things like career paths and stuff. Hopefully we'll be adopting that as we grow bigger.
Yeah, it definitely takes a long time, because people do have to experience it. You can only sort of give some pointers, but what the culture is can only be best experienced after they have spent some time with you. Again, one of the popular definitions is the way we do things around here. So you can't really capture it in 5 bullet points. But definitely one of the things that you touched on was definitely things are informal. People can connect, sort of a family environment, family feel, which says a lot already. So any other responses? I mean, how do you approach this, the sense of culture? How do you respond to somebody who might be interested to know?
I think for us, trust is the big aspect of our culture. So if someone was to ask that, you can't sort of say, well, it's all about, you've got to build trust. The way that we answer that is that the company is open, honest, transparent, and really all the characteristics that would then build trust. You can't sort of force trust. Trust has to be earned. So anybody coming in, we look for them to display those values and the same as everyone else. And trust is a result of that, as opposed to a requirement.
And those are the guiding principles and values that drives everything that happens within the organization. So it's sort of a supporting mechanism also to ensure that trust can build over time. Yeah, that's it's just one of the ways we can actually respond to, so looking at the values, what we stand for, because it's really end of the day who we are, which is more important than what we do and the things that we are engaged in. Anyone else? Just curious, how do you respond to this culture question? When we do share the organizational charts, for example, on our website, that also says a lot about what sort of power structure or organizational structure that we have got in-house, in a way that shows whether the environment or the atmosphere has to be felt, but the environment that has been created, whether it's formal or informal, rules and regulations, but also whether they get to have autonomy, what to do. Is it a sharing culture? Is sort of an individual culture? But that's something that I think, it's hard to capture, but people are quite interested to know, not what the rules and regulations are, but how do you define your culture at workplace or culture of the organization? So there's a group activity that you have. Let's look at the first group activity. If you got access to this, the one on organizational design, I just wanted to quickly check. Have you got access to the organizational design, the workshop 1 activity?
Yeah, I have.
Okay, that's fantastic. If you could spend about 10 minutes just to give a sense of how would you draw your story, your organization story, because we looked at quite a few samples in the previous slides. When it comes to your organization in particular, how does it look like? So this is an individual task, of course, but then we can share some of our results collectively. So if you've already done it, that's brilliant. You can start right away. Or if you take some time to work on that.
Can I just ask a question? This is on the Solent website, the Help to Grow site, says getting started in module 7. It says for me that this has not been unlocked yet. Has anyone else got the same?
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah, I had
think
the same
if
issue.
you haven't submitted the work for the previous modules, it doesn't unlock this one.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have to open all those pages up, James.
Right. Meanwhile, I'll try to upload this on our screen. Give me just 1 minute.
You have to go into each of the links under there and open up all the modules 4, 5, and 6.
You've caught me out. I haven't done my homework.
It caught me as well. Sue helped me out.
I'm in the same place.
Okay, I believe some of you are looking at it on your screens. This is a PDF file, so I can't really share it here. So I have to go back to screen sharing. In case you have not found the file, we can do it together here. So this is the file, workshop 1, looking at organizational design in your business in particular. So these are some of the samples that we have already looked at, whether you've got a team-based structure, the span of control, and what sort of hierarchy you have in place. and the activity is really sort of asking to draw your current structure. So some samples are useful, so some templates, but also more importantly, what sort of rationale do you use to justify that this is the right structure to have at this point in time, given the stage of the business? So in case you have done the activity already before the lesson and you have identified 2 or 3 action points, so sort of areas that you would like to address, even if it's working just fine, but to sort of improvise on what is going on at the moment, and what sort of actions would you take to address those changes and how you will achieve this. So what sort of measurement criteria, how do you monitor those changes? Anybody can really sort of start if you're ready.
Well, for us, one area that we're having to address, we're a little bit too flat in engineering. Okay. So we are looking to add another layer into that, just to break it into teams and then start to create that sort of structure in there. The reason being for that was that they were all working as individuals. So there's 12 of them in the team, and they're all just working as individuals. So we've now created 3 teams with a team leader, and they're now working as teams rather than individuals, right, or just taking on and mixing and matching to programs.
And they all report to one line?
The 3 teams will all report up into one department head, yes. Yeah. But it does give a degree of autonomy, pushing that down to another layer down below, where it was getting too big to manage.
Okay, all right, that's a critical move. Yeah, okay. That does connect to the organizational structure as well as the span of control. So both the issues are in there. Okay, anyone else would like to share some of your reflections? it would be interesting to listen to Meg also, because you were sharing, you're trying to sort of move more towards the decentralized structure in terms of decision making, and so it'll be useful to see what sort of steps are you considering in order to get there.
So at the moment, we're very much in the infancy of it with regards to we're trying to divide down what kind of lives in my head into separate entities within the business. So at the moment, between me and, so the structure is pretty small. It's myself, my sort of number two, and then the coaches delivering the sessions, and the number two sort of delivers the sessions a bit as well. But it is trying to empower the coaches to have not just the coaching role. So one of them takes on our social media, another one takes on our sort of some of the retention duties that filter down from my number two. So for us, it's one of our key focuses, particularly even this week, is to have really defined roles, and then because then from that we can wind back to metrics that we measure those roles by and whether people are succeeding in their roles. So yeah, that's the point that we're at the moment, is the action points are divide everything into pots and then decide how you measure those pots and then measure them.
Who sets the metrics? Is it also a collective process, or you've got something to refer to as sort of a template when it comes to setting the metrics?
So I think that's kind of me and the manager that's with me. We sort of sit down and decide what we want to see, and then we create the metrics from that. So for example, with the social media thing, it's about what the following is, what the interaction is, what kinds of posts get the most interaction, and then so our social media staff member has to create those reports that we then discuss and then make the plan for the next one. For me, it's about becoming more reactive to actual data rather than kind of just throwing stuff at the wall and seeing what sticks.
Okay, so you can sort of target better also in terms of so analytics are really, really useful. It's great. We didn't really have these things 10 years ago, and now you've got too much data to process. What to do with it, which is a bit of risk. Thank you. That's great. Anyone else? It's interesting because this is where you are, that's where you want to be. What steps I should be taking? How do I monitor and assess it? And then once it happens, so how do I measure it? Like, can I continue? Can I sustain this process over a period of time? That becomes challenging. So to have the right metrics in place helps us to maintain the rhythm as time passes. But anyways, I mean, if you finish the activity later, obviously I'll be very happy to take a look at it and then see if we could, especially the metrics part, because that's what I've seen in the past. It's hard because sometimes we can use a template used by a similar business, but then we might have different value added components. So our metrics could not be exactly identical. So to recognize or identify new components that could be better indicators of whether the new steps are working or not, that needs time. It's a bit of a teamwork in some cases. Unless obviously you're the expert in the field, then that helps because you've got the necessary expertise to do it by yourself.
We have like hard metrics and soft metrics, if that makes sense. Like hard metrics is literal data. Did you hit that sales target? Did we get that many clients in? And the soft metrics are more like, have you done something to help the overall vision of the business? Does it fit the vision of the business, which can be harder to quantify, but should still be able to sort of be monitored in some respect.
Yeah, absolutely. That's okay. I'd like to pick up a bit more on that, but okay, let's move on to the third section because there's lots to discuss. Unfortunately, I've only got one session, so the third section is looking at the agility aspect, and I think that's something that you're familiar with. It's because so I'll just let you read the slide first before I add a few more components here. So I think directly or indirectly, lots of applications have showed up in different sectors. Just some pointers of some really good work. There's a couple of books I would like to recommend if you get a chance to pick up a copy, because there's so many contemporary illustrations of how agile system has kicked in different industries and how systems talk to each other. So yeah, so these two books on the top, and I think there's some short articles that I've referred to. But I'm just curious, have you sort of used any agile systems at workplace? Has it worked? Do you think it's absolutely necessary, or it has got its downsides that you've personally experienced?
We use it exclusively now, and it's been a huge improvement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, different industries have got different applications. I mean, for example, in the shipping industry, these days, the warehouses are talking to the ships and they're exchanging notes in their own language, algorithms. So, sorry, Simon, you wanted to share something?
Well, no, I was just going to say that we've installed Jira and using Jira. It's sort of an agile base system, but it's a little bit more program management purpose, but it does introduce the agile methodology into the business.
Yeah, it's a bit of a shift also, I mean, regardless of which sector we've seen the applications in. So for example, if you look at this particular two ways of planning, predictive and adaptive. So predictive planning, we also, in project management terminologies, we use the concept of waterfall, which is sort of a linear approach here. But if you look at the adaptive planning, you've got agile, very good Prince methodologies. Some of you may be familiar with this. So that's the adaptive planning in place. So I just wanted to add new information here just to understand adaptive planning a bit better. Here, so if you look at the traditional, the one on the right, the diagram on the right, so you've got time and cost along y-axis, time along x-axis. So traditional approaches sort of tends to resist changes. Agile, they do consider the ongoing changes from time to time, and also maintaining the cost over time, not ensuring that it doesn't rise, which is also a consequence if you resist change from time to time. But on the left, if you look at the waterfall project, where you plan, create, review, and release, whereas if you look at agile, you plan, create, review, and then release. So it's sort of an ongoing process, not just a one-off. It does also affect our timeline of projects, which is also something that's critical because it has got sort of effect on our budget and resource planning. So that's something to explore. I don't know if you've come across this waterfall project before, but typically in project management, we tend to use this. But I think timeline is quite important, considering everything that's changing around us. So it's a quick question, because some of you have applied to it and you've seen the benefits, and I'm sure at the same time you've seen some of the risks. Which parts of your business face uncertainty and which have a stable operating environment, especially the one that's facing uncertainty, and how do you approach it? How do you address that? Earlier, I think, Simon, you were mentioning that you maintain a change culture, which is embedded. That's part of the culture also. Innovation, risk, change. So how frequent is the change, and which areas have you identified that faces gets hit?
Well, it's a very important point there about the uncertainty and the stable operating environment. So we consciously try to maintain stability in operations. So the whole ethos is trying to keep the the agile, the innovation, the change outside of the manufacturing, the actual volume manufacturing side. So the fact that everything that's changing is happening outside, and inside the manufacturing side becomes a little bit more organic. So the fact, because that's what's paying the bills, whereas everything that happens outside of that is really aimed at trying to keep that core stable. So it's a little bit of both, really, rather than having everything all fluid. It's trying to keep the fluid areas outside of manufacturing.
Yeah. Okay. Anyone else would like to share some of your own reflections? I think Ian mentioned earlier that you have also implemented an agile approach. Maybe some reflections that you would like to share with us?
Yeah, we actually, because we have one very, very large international client who basically forced that way of working on us. But I would say that the areas which are of a risk to us is our inability to be able to scale that. We are very trapped in a way of working which doesn't allow for significant growth. So trying to address that at the moment is what I'm looking at.
Okay, yeah, sure. Okay, the scale of work, how agile can actually help us. I mean, some of the comforts of predictive planning, when you face uncertainty, we make a plan because it's comforting. But then when have you stuck with the plan that wasn't working? And that's why you've got project champions in the team, sort of can point out to sort of when we should be pulling out of some of the previously planned activities because it's not working. Because if we continue doing that, we end up with the waterfall approach anyway. That's no longer agile. And some of the reflections I've seen from business managers over time is sometimes you approach using agile lens, and then end up practicing a waterfall approach. So there's a risk there. So it's hard to sort of maintain the agile approach throughout the process, because sometimes you start with an agile and then finish with waterfall. That does harm the process in the end. So how to design an agile organization, I think this actually does help. So to have a broad work specialization, or specifically the T-shaped skills in people, a set of specializations, sort of multiple skills, generalists, we talked about this, generalists over specialists, and to enable and activate cross-functional teams. Again, whether you would like to do that using a matrix organizational structure or a horizontal structure. It's hard actually to manage cross-functional teams if you've got a horizontal structure. So there's a little bit of hybrid or matrix structure component that is generally found useful. So that's one of the things we can consider going forward. Again, the decision comes down to whether you would like to keep the same span of control or something that Simon shared earlier, the move towards sort of reducing the span of control, also sort of centralizing it a bit, the steps that you've just recently taken. And then finally, the chain of command, sort of how many people are involved in the decision-making activity and who holds the authority. As your team grows, these decisions can change over time. Has it changed over time for some of you? Have you reconsidered realigning the chain of command? Has it helped? Did you switch back to your old methods because something that you tried didn't really work? Okay, quite a few technical terms there: span of control, hierarchy, and chain of command. But I've seen these changes often. As the size and scope of business grows, it's harder to capture this when you are having an online business, e-commerce, because some of your employees might be freelancers or giggers or gig workers, as we call them. So yeah, okay. I would really sort of encourage you to read through it, because this is basically just revising what you've already discussed, how to design an agile working environment, but also making sure that you follow through it. And in order to follow through it, I think the span of control and chain of command plays a significant role, because you need to have a monitoring system in place. In some cases, you've got multiple activities running in different directions. So unless you've got a system to capture all those value generated intentionally or as a spillover effect, could cost a particular business. I think the last 5 minutes, we can just have a general discussion on, I think you can reflect some of your experiences or something that we spoke on, any particular theme that you'd like to pick up on. Then we can just have a discussion without the slides. So is there any theme in particular that you'd like?
There was just one thing that you did mention about Agile, and the thing that we found really beneficial is that it allows you to fail fast and then move on. So we're making very small incremental deliveries all the time, as opposed to waiting for something to be finally delivered in a fully working fashion, which of course never happens. So it allows us that incremental approach. So when things do go wrong, which they do for everyone, at least we get past that. We're financially insulated from the really, really big mistakes. That would say is the big advantage that we see.
Thank you, Ian. That's fantastic. That's true. Actually, this system helps us to capture those incremental value added, because you're aiming for a radical, let's say radical innovation, but it does comes down to identifying the value added from the incremental innovation output. So yeah, okay, interesting. Anyone else? Any other reflections?
Yeah, just one other quick thing you also said as well about change, that it doesn't work and going back. One of the things that we learned was you never go back. If the change doesn't work, then you change again. You don't go back. It's you have to keep moving forward. Otherwise, yeah, going back never achieves anything.
Okay.
It may be your future change may be something nearer to where you were, but it's still an improvement on where you were. You never go back.
Also, given the nature of the change, whether it's changing market size or total number of employees that you have had and then now have, that could also introduce new measures in place. It takes a while to see the effectiveness of the new revised plans. So that's why it's essential to have the monitoring approach, just to make sure that the deliverables are clear. Anything else? Meg, would you like to share something? Thanks for all your input, by the way. We share more time because I don't really know your backgrounds and because you've got different industries, which actually helps the discussion. And you've got, especially when we started the discussion, when we talked about what's your stage in the business, we had quite a few responses were mixed, growth, maturity, and then Simon said you already went through a few rebirths. So it'll be useful to have an extended discussion at some point to capture more reflections. But yeah, sorry, Meg, you switched on the microphone briefly. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I was just I think when it comes to, there's certain elements of today that with the size and infancy of our business, we don't necessarily have as much relevant input on things like when you reach a point where you need to change something and you go back. For us, we're still inputting the first round of attempts at sorting out the organisational structure and things like that. So it's quite interesting for me to actually listen to the people who are then a couple of iterations further down the line and how they're adapting to it. So yeah, I think what Simon was sort of saying is once you've established that something needs to change, then even if the first attempt at changing it doesn't work, then that thing still needed changing in the first place. So it's unlikely that going back to the original version is going to work for you. So there's that, phrase like never go back to old girlfriends or old jobs sort of thing. So there was always a reason it needed changing in the first place. It's unlikely that going back to the original one's going to work for you.
I like the analogy.
Yeah. It's true. Yeah. Two things I think I'd like to add before we sort of wrap up the session subsequently is there's quite a bit of literature out there. I started by pointing out the STAR model. If I can just quickly go back. I would really encourage you to look at this model when you get a chance, a bit more in depth. We could have an entire session just discussing the STAR model because there's so many components that that this model has identified, this framework has identified that will be useful. And also, I mean, some of the works, sort of developed by Galbraith, the 3 levers of organizational design. You've identified leadership, talent, and organization itself. So sometimes we spend too much time on the first 2 levers, leadership and talent, and less on organization, which sometimes can cost a business regardless of which stage they're in. So as a takeaway, I think it'll be useful regardless of your stage of your business to just have a look at the STAR model once again, because it does identify and capture the right indicators and variables, and also helps us to ask the right questions. Sometimes it's hard to do it when it's your business to ask the right questions, because you know obviously the things that's going well, things that can improve. If you've got a participatory approach, you welcome ideas. But if you're going down the route of open innovation subsequently, for example, forming strategic alliances, partnerships, I think one of you mentioned you've been through a couple of acquisitions in the past. So there are questions that we could ask from time to time, just to see the effectiveness of our current practices and current model. So yeah, once again, the STAR model, it's a useful tool to keep in mind going forward. Hi, Sue, I can see you. Okay, I hope you haven't fallen asleep.
That was really good. I enjoyed it. I like learning and just listening at the background. It's really fun.
Well, I would like to thank everybody for your participation. Still wish we had sort of longer time, but you know, happy to be contacted and follow up discussions. Also happy to support with the workshop activity that you have. There are 2, the one that we looked at, a couple of you added, but the second workshop I think will be picked up in the in-person lesson that we will have subsequently. So thank you once again.
Lovely. Thank you very, very much, Rick. That was really good. And does anybody have any final questions or any comments for Rick? No? Okay. Then it just stands for me to say thanks ever so much. And I will see you lovely ladies and gents next Tuesday for your peer-to-peer calls. If you've got any issues between here and there, do let me know. And as Rick kindly extended the invitation, if you've got any really complicated things, ask Rick. So if not, then I would say thank you very much for your time this morning. Hope you found it valuable, and we will see you next week.
Thank you. Really valuable.
Bye-bye. All the best.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Let's stay motivated.
That was really good, Rick. Thank you. Really enjoyed that. I do like them just listening in the background. It makes it so much easier.
Thank you, Emma.
Cool.
I think it was okay.
That was okay.
Yeah. Start off on a high. I don't know what happened. Sometimes it happens. Like not the best teaching day of your life, but yeah, I didn't want to spend too much time on identifying sort of. Let me just stop the recording. I think we can have a brief discussion, reflect on a few things.